In 2009, a team of geneticists published a study in the journal PLOS I. They had spent years analyzing the family tree of the Spanish Habsburg dynasty, the royal family that ruled the most powerful empire on earth for 200 years. What they found was extraordinary. The last Spanish Habsburg king had an inbreeding coefficient higher than that of a child born to a brother and sister. His name was Charles II of Spain. He could not chew his food properly because his jaw was severely deformed. He did not speak until the age of 4, and he did not walk until the age of 8. He suffered seizures, could barely see, and was described by the papal nuncio in Madrid as looking already dead at the age of 30. He died childless at 38, and with him, the most powerful royal dynasty in Western history collapsed, not from war, not from revolution, but from 2 centuries of deliberate decisions made in the name of keeping power inside the family. They knew. The doctors warned them. The priests warned them. The evidence was visible in every portrait painted across 5 generations. They kept marrying each other anyway. This is the story of how the Spanish Habsburgs built an empire that spanned half the globe and then destroyed themselves from the inside out. At its height in the 16th century, the Spanish Habsburg Empire controlled Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, large parts of Italy, and vast territories across the Americas and Asia. It was the first empire in history on which, as contemporaries noted, the sun never set. The Habsburgs had built this empire not primarily through conquest, but through marriage. For 2 centuries, their strategy was simple and devastatingly effective. Marry within the family, keep the bloodlines and the titles consolidated, and never allow the wealth and power of the dynasty to be diluted by outsiders. Philip I married Joanna of Castile, his first cousin. Their son Charles I, who became Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, married his first cousin Isabella of Portugal. Philip II married his niece Anna of Austria. The family tree did not branch outward. It folded back on itself, again and again, across 200 years. In the short term, the strategy worked. The empire grew, the wealth accumulated, the titles multiplied. But in the cells of every child born from these unions, something was accumulating too. And unlike gold or land, it could not be managed, redistributed, or spent away. The first visible sign appeared early. Historians call it the Habsburg jaw, a pronounced underbite caused by mandibular prognathism, a condition where the lower jaw grows longer than the upper. In mild form, it was barely noticeable. As the generations passed and the inbreeding deepened, it became impossible to ignore. Look at the portraits in sequence, and you can watch it happen across a century. The slight protrusion in Charles V, the more pronounced jaw in Philip II, the increasingly severe deformity in Philip III and Philip IV. By the time you reach Charles II, the last of the line, the condition was so extreme that he reportedly could not bring his upper and lower teeth together at all. Court physicians documented his symptoms in detail. He was constantly ill. He suffered from diarrhea and vomiting for most of his life. He was described as mentally slow, though historians now believe this was at least partly the result of his physical suffering, rather than any inherent cognitive defect. He was unable to produce an heir despite 2 marriages. Both of his wives outlived him. The court knew what they were looking at. Habsburg children had been dying in infancy at catastrophic rates for decades. The 2009 genetic study found that infant mortality in the dynasty reached nearly 50% in the final generations, compared to roughly 20% in the general Spanish population at the same time. These were not coincidences. These were consequences. And yet Philip IV, Charles's father, still chose to marry his own niece to produce him, because the alternative, in Habsburg thinking, was worse. The alternative was letting someone outside the family get close to the throne. Charles II became King of Spain in 1665. He was 4 years old. His mother ruled as regent for the first decade of his reign because Charles could not. As he grew older, the situation did not improve. He was frequently bedridden. His speech was difficult to understand. He was prone to what contemporaries described as fits, likely epileptic seizures. He sweated heavily, suffered from hallucinations, and was reported by multiple ambassadors at the Spanish court to be essentially incapable of governing. The empire did not collapse immediately. The bureaucracy continued to function. Ministers made decisions in his name, but the absence of effective royal authority created a vacuum that foreign powers began to probe, and the question that consumed European diplomacy for the last 20 years of Charles's reign was not whether Spain would be strong or weak. It was who would inherit the throne when he died. Charles was aware of his situation with a clarity that makes his story genuinely tragic. He made multiple wills. He changed his mind repeatedly. He submitted himself to exorcism in 1699, genuinely believing, or allowing himself to be convinced, that his physical and mental condition was the result of demonic possession rather than 2 centuries of his family's choices. He died on November 1st, 1700. He was 38 years old. The autopsy report, preserved in the Spanish Royal Archives, stated that his body contained not a single drop of blood, that his heart was the size of a peppercorn, that his lungs were corroded, that his intestines were gangrenous, and that his head was full of water. Whether all of this is literal or reflects the medical language of the 17th century, the conclusion was the same. There was nothing left. If you are watching this and thinking that no dynasty could have made the same mistakes twice, let alone 10 times across 200 years, stay with this. Because what the science eventually proved about the Habsburgs is more precise and more damning than anything their contemporaries were able to say. Subscribe if you want more history told this way. In 2009, researchers at the University of Santiago de Compostela published the most comprehensive genetic analysis ever conducted on a historical royal dynasty. They reconstructed the complete family tree of the Spanish Habsburgs across 16 generations, 3,000 individuals, and calculated the inbreeding coefficient for each member of the direct royal line. The results were stark. Charles II of Spain had an inbreeding coefficient of 0.254. To put that in context, a child produced by a brother and sister has a coefficient of 0.25. Charles II's parents were uncle and niece. The generations of accumulated inbreeding behind them had produced a genetic load equivalent to direct sibling reproduction. The study identified 2 specific recessive genetic disorders that Charles almost certainly carried: combined pituitary hormone deficiency and distal renal tubular acidosis. Either condition alone would have produced serious health consequences. Together, in a body already compromised by generations of accumulated genetic damage, they explain virtually every symptom documented in the historical record. The researchers noted something else. The Habsburgs were not unique in their marriage strategy. Royal families across Europe practiced dynastic endogamy. What made the Spanish Habsburgs exceptional was the duration and the intensity. 2 centuries without a single significant outmarriage in the direct line. They had, in the precise language of the study, optimized themselves for extinction. The empire Charles II left behind was divided by the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713 between France and Austria. Spain lost its European territories, its influence, and its position as the dominant power on the continent. The dynasty that had ruled half the world for 200 years left behind a kingdom, a bureaucracy, and a genetic case study that scientists are still citing today. The Spanish Habsburgs were not stupid people. Charles V was one of the most capable rulers in European history. Philip II governed an empire of extraordinary complexity with genuine administrative skill. They understood politics, diplomacy, war, and religion at the highest levels. What they could not understand, or would not allow themselves to understand, was that the very mechanism they used to protect their power was the mechanism that was destroying it. Every marriage back into the family was a rational decision in the short term. It kept land, titles, and alliances consolidated. It prevented rivals from gaining footholds. It made political sense for the generation that arranged it. The cost was paid by the generation that was born from it. Charles II was the bill coming due, and the Habsburg court, looking at him in his final years, unable to govern, unable to produce an heir, unable to chew his own food, could not fully admit what they were seeing, because admitting it would have meant admitting that every decision made by every generation before him had contributed to the man sitting in front of them. The portraits of the Spanish Habsburgs still hang in the Prado in Madrid. Walk through them in sequence, and you can read the whole story in the faces, the slow, visible accumulation of consequence across a century and a half of choices that nobody stopped making until there was no one left to make them. History rarely gives us this kind of clarity. Usually, the causes of collapse are complicated, disputed, and impossible to fully separate. The Spanish Habsburgs are different. The cause is documented. The mechanism is understood. The outcome was, in retrospect, inevitable. They just never believed it would actually happen to them. If this is the kind of history that makes you see the present differently, subscribe. Europe's dynasties made decisions whose consequences took generations to arrive. There are more stories like this one. The next is already waiting.